On the first episode of the Auto Riff, we take a look at the first gas engine produced automobile, the Benz patent Motorwagen. Then we look back at the news of the week in the vehicle world, Super Bowl ads, and a few new vehicles were unveiled. Sit back, buckle up, let's slide that shifter to reverse and set our sights back to 1886 and look into the story of the Benz Motorwagen. I want to start off by saying that no, I will not be going in order in future cars. But I thought that starting at the beginning would be fitting for the beginning of this podcast. Technically, a couple vehicles came before this one, but this one had the patent, literally, and was the first one produced in any kind of numbers that I can find, at least. After this, I plan on finding cars that interest me and learning about them regardless of the year. But right now, I'm going to give you the specs on the Motorwagen. But in my research, the interesting story of how this came to be is honestly more important than the car itself. And I use that term car, in quotes, loosely here. Carl Benz submitted the patent for the three-wheeled vehicle with an internal combustion engine on January 29th, 1886. It was powered by a 954cc single-cylinder four-stroke engine that produced a neck-breaking 3/4 of a horsepower at an astounding 400 RPMs. I don't think you can find a car these days that idles at 400 RPMs, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, all of that is well and good, but to me, the story was how it came to be. And to look at that, we need to look at Carl's wife, Bertha. Bertha was born to a wealthy family in a time when women were denied access to higher education. Bertha was determined to show the world that females were capable of great things. And if you ask me, she did. When she met a young, poor engineer on a train in 1869, speaking of developing a horseless carriage, she fell in love with him. Her father tried to persuade her against marrying young Carl, but it was no use. In fact, Bertha invested her entire dowry to help build up the company formed by her soon-to-be husband. Not only did she invest and build the company that would eventually patent the first automobile, but after it was built and no one was buying it, in 1888, she set out on a long journey with her two sons from Mannheim to Pforzheim, a distance of about 180 kilometers or roughly 112 miles. She set out to show the world what could be done with the automobile. And even with several breakdowns and running out of gas, and remember, this is obviously before gas stations on every single street corner, she made the trip. This show of force helped grow the company into the largest automobile plant of its day. You can actually take this journey today. Apparently it's signposted and everything in Germany. So if you find yourself there and you aren't on the Autobahn, I would obviously. If you can find a stretch of road where you can max out your car, I think you do that. But I think the Bertha's journey would have to be a must-do on your bucket list if you find yourself in Germany. So now that you know the story of how it came to be, let's talk a little about the actual car. As I stated earlier, it was a single-cylinder four-stroke engine that put out 3/4 of a horsepower. That was the Model 1. So when the subsequent Model 2 came out, it had 1.5 horsepower, which is double, right? Like if you had been driving the 3/4 horsepower and then you get into the 1.5 horsepower, do you even know how to control it at that point? That's like jumping in a modern economy car and then jumping into a sports car, right? It has to get away from you, right? But then in the Model 3, which is the one that Bertha actually drove on her long distance journey, it had 2 horsepower. That had it reached a lightning fast top speed of 10 miles per hour or 16 kilometers an hour, depending on what part of the world you're in. And now in 1887, the Motorwagen was equipped with a fuel tank. Very nice of them to do that. Wooden spoke wheels, and they had leather brake shoes on the rear wheels. Now, slightly off topic, but not really. I read a little story, and I don't remember where I saw it when I was doing the research for this, that this car was very hard to control. Like, it didn't have modern controls as we know it now today, with a steering wheel and a gas pedal and a brake pedal and all that. Had a much more convoluted system. But apparently, in one of the times they were showing the car off, or when they unveiled it, they actually crashed it into a wall because they couldn't get it to stop, which is, I think, kind of funny. The engine in the Motorwagen had some similarities to today's engines. It had a pushrod operated intake valve, not an exhaust valve yet, and it had a carburetor. And when I say carburetor, I believe the very first Model 1 actually had fibers or something that were soaked with fuel. But then, and I don't know if it was the Model 2 when they went up to the astounding 1.5 horsepower that they added the carburetor. I wasn't really able to find that part. But it did have an open crankcase with a drip oiling system. If you have the time to look up this vehicle, look at the pictures of the engine. Like, everything's exposed. I mean, we're talking belts are out, gears are out, and everything. And I have to imagine that thing would be a safety nightmare today. Like, I don't know how many kids out there would absolutely have their fingers chopped off by this engine. So all told, as far as I can find, about 25 motor wagons were produced from 1886 to 1893. So not like set the world on fire numbers, but when Bertha took her trip, I think they had only sold a couple, maybe. So I guess going from a couple to 25 is a huge deal. The motor wagon was eventually replaced in 1894 by the Benz, and I'm gonna butcher this name, Velo, which had 4 tires. But that is a story for another day. So that's just a quick recap of some research I did. If you know more, if you have more information on the Benz patent motor wagon, or if I got something wrong, as I'm bound to do. I mean, like, one of my sources is like Wikipedia, so I mean, it's not my only source. I will have all the sources listed in the description of where I pulled information from. But if you know more about it, absolutely email me at theautoriff@gmail.com. It's just the title of the podcast at gmail.com. Or you can find me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Facebook's probably the one I spend the least amount of time on. But you can absolutely send a message there, and I'll add it into the next podcast. I'd like to have like a listener section, obviously, when we get there. The intro, as of right now, I believe has 1 whole play. So one of you out there did listen to this, and thank you for that. And hopefully I can get up to 2 on this one, and that would be perfect. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Auto Riff. The plan is to make this show grow and add more segments. Again, if you have any comments, suggestions, or stories you want to share, please email me at theautoriff@gmail.com or find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks again for taking some time out of your day to listen. Everyone drive safe out there and have a great week.